Zango, Zango. You know, it's been anglicized. Zongo has come to be widely accepted.
Zongo. A microcosm of diversity. Zongos are mostly densely populated areas within the major cities in Ghana. Ghana currently has over 400 Zongos scattered all over the country with population of more than 5 million people. Zongo communities are predominantly Muslim, diverse yet homogeneous in culture. The first encounter the indigenous Zongos had with Ghana dates as far back as the 16th century. From the northern Sahel, the earliest active Zongo communities in Ghana started in Salaga, and by the 19th century they have been established in every part of the country. Salaga was a trading hub where caravan traders stationed to sell their wares. Until Salaga went down due to the defeat of the Ashanti Kingdom in 1874, they were mainly trading in kola nuts, cattle, slaves, and horses.
Salaga does not exist in isolation, or it did not exist in isolation. We should understand Salaga as a place that linked the north to the south. And when I'm talking about linking the north to the south, I am not just talking about linking the north of Ghana to the south of Ghana, but we are talking about linking the whole of the northern part of West Africa and beyond, including North Africa, to areas further down, you know, from Salaga to Kintampo to Kumasi, as far as to Accra to the coast. Now, when we talk about the year of the establishment of Salaga, it is still highly contestable. Now, the level of contest has to do with the general history of the foundation or the rise and fall of kingdoms in the northern part of the country. If you look at Salaga, Salaga was very central to the Gonja kingdom. So it looks a bit awkward for someone to assume that the Gonja kingdom existed before Salaga was founded. You know, as historians, we still have a problem. So technically, we have historians that will say, for example, Salaga was established maybe in the mid-1600s, from about 1675 thereabouts, you know. Others will say Salaga was established, say, maybe after the 1700s, you know. But technically, what we need to bear in mind, I will say that Salaga should be considered a place that was founded, around the 16th century. You know, the period of its foundation should be tied to the period of the foundation and expansion of the Gonja kingdom in general.
Well, remember that during the colonial period, we had the Gold Coast colony. What is today's Ghana is composed of the Gold Coast colony, Ashanti, and the northern territories. So those are the three that constitute today's Ghana, plus also Transvolta Togoland, which was added later. Strictly speaking, when you ask the question, where did they come into the Gold Coast? Simply put, they came from the northern territories, which is part of today's Ghana, but at the time, it was a different administrative unit under colonialism.
Some would like to look at it from the angle of the wave from the northern parts of the Gold Coast. Others would prefer to look at it from the other side, from the Volta side, Volta region side, those who migrated from Nigeria through Aplao and others. So taking it from the north, obviously we are referring to the Moshis and Busangas, who had a natural relationship with their kith and kin in Dagomba land. As you might know, there is a relationship between the Dagombes and the Moshis of the then Upper Volta. And in fact, we have what is known as the Moli Dagbani genealogical tree, which encompasses Dagbani, Mampurle, Moshi, and some 2 other languages, to such an extent that when a Dagomba man is speaking, the Moshi man can understand. There is a certain relationship. So it was very easy for them to migrate from their part of the sub-region to the then Northern Territories. Now, when you take the other angle, we had another wave from Hausa land, and they were coming here for mainly trading activities and the spread of Islam. That is how come in his compilation of the history of the Trans-Volta Togoland and some parts of northern region, Malam Umaru Karaki, he composed a poem about what he titled Fatao Chingbanja. Fatao Chingbanja in Hausa means the Gunja trade. Now there was this trade route from Sokoto and some parts of northern Nigeria to Salaga. He coined it this way: Fatao Chingbanja kamar haji daga badi shebana. He likened the Gunja trade to Hajj. The performance of the Hajj used to be by trekking. You go this year and you return in another year. Dagabadi Shebana. So this is how I would put it. The migration from northern Nigeria and Upper Volta. And they were traders and clerics. For instance, Malam Umaru Karaki used to be brought to Salaga by his parents. But later when he grew, he came and settled in Ketekrachi. There were 2 waves: migration of clerics and then migration of traders. Now, the traders used to come and pick, how Kula is highly treasured in Hausa land. The culture of northern Nigerians, the Hausas in particular, Kula played a major role in their culture. So, and even though Nigeria has Kula, but there was a certain love, obsession with Kula from Gold Coast. So some of them used to come down here, take away Kula and even salt from the Boya area.
Zongo, referred to by the British as strangers' quarters and later categorized as Hausa and Hausa-speaking traders, originally consisted of Fulanis, Zabarmas, Mosis, Wangaras, Nufawa, Kanuris, Hausawa, and Yorubas. Diverse factors contributed to the establishment of Zongos in Accra.
The lingua franca is of course Hausa. So non-Zongo people, like ordinary Ga people, think of them as Hausas. But in fact, they are different languages and they come from different parts of, some of them even come from Yoruba land.
The community Sra in Accra is a corruption of Salaga. Well, I am saying we are jumping because Salaga's essence in Accra, as far as historical records are concerned, seem to be a bit recent. What triggered the presence of traders from Salaga in Accra was actually the 1874 war that was fought by the British against Ashanti. One thing we need to understand is that Salaga was an important aspect of the general Ashanti Kingdom. Usually they describe Salaga and other northern states as Asante hinterland. So as a result of that, there was no way by which you could understand trade in Salaga without understanding the history of Asante also in general. Because one of the major factors that drove trade in Salaga was kola nuts. So because of the symbolic importance of this product, kola nut, certainly you get the history of Salaga being tied to that of what? Asante. What happened in 1874 was that by 1873 or 1872, the Dutch, who were the last European power, sold their possessions to the British. You need to understand that we didn't have a single European power in Accra. We had pockets of European influences. That is why you will have, for example, Danish Accra. You will have Dutch Accra. You understand, you have British Accra, each of them having some form of influence. So essentially, by 1872, 1873, all these European powers had left the shores of the then Gold Coast, sold their last possession to the British. Some who came not with kola nuts, but rather with cattle, and they also drove cattle from Nigeria into Accra, and they were also very influential in the establishment of some of the Zongo communities in Accra.
Accra had become the capital of the Gold Coast in 1877, and it had a domino effect on trade and expansion.
They thought about extending their power and influence beyond the coastal region. Beyond the coastal region will mean that they were extending their power beyond Accra into Kumasi and further afield. But Kumasi at that time was also a very powerful kingdom. And so they needed to fight Asante in order to be able to get into the north. So in 1874, we had this battle that took place between the British and then Ashanti. So what technically happened was that we had several alliances. I'm talking about individual ethnic groups that also backed the British. And therefore, that facilitated the conquest of Asante. And once that happened, because Asante already had what we call resident ambassadors in important trading centers such as Ketekrachi, Salaga, Kintampo, and other places, those people revolted against the supremacy of Asante. So what I simply want to say is that when we are talking about the issue of foreign affairs and diplomacy, actually, we already had our own form of diplomacy. We knew diplomatic affairs before we came under British rule. So, because we had resident Asante ambassadors in Salaga and other places to ensure that trade and the interest of Asante was maintained, immediately Asante was defeated. All these ethnic groups also revolted against Asante. And in fact, some of the resident ambassadors in places like Salaga were killed. So as a counter solution to these unfortunate happenings, what Asante also did was to withdraw trade from Salaga. So once trade was withdrawn from Salaga, the British wanted an alternative way of encouraging trade far away from Kumasi. So what happened? They encouraged the traders who were in Salaga and Ketekrachi to rather come and establish the same business in Accra. So the Zongos in Accra could in part be traceable to this kind of 1874 event, where these kola nut traders had to relocate from Salaga to Accra. Now, it will interest you to note that kola nuts actually went upwards, northwards, before deflecting into Nigeria. It was after the relocation of the traders to Accra that we started transporting kola nuts to Nigeria or Lagos by sea. Otherwise, we carried kola nuts overland using donkeys.
Whereas other migrants stayed due to abolition of the slave trade, other factors also accounted for the movement into the Gold Coast. Some were due to recruitment of security personnel from Nigeria.
In those days, the Gold Coast relied on Nigeria for their security. So most of the houses and Yorubas and Fulanis and then the Baribari, they formed part of the security apparatus of the Gold Coast. And they were also very influential in the establishment of the Zongos, especially when they were out of service. Rather than go back to Nigeria and other parts of West Africa, they instead established Zongos in Accra.
Captain John Glover, he started gathering escapee slaves into what at the time was called the Hausa Constabulary from the 1860s. In between 1873 and 1874, when the British had their first big war with Ashanti, they sent, Glover sent like 700 of these freed slaves. They were very good horsemen also. They were very good cavalry. He sent them to help in the invasion of Ashanti. And at the time they were called Glover's Constabulary or Glover's Hausa Constabulary. So this platoon joined the forces. They also were joined with soldiers from Sierra Leone, because the British also had, they were all causing trouble there, also soldiers from Sierra Leone, and contingents from Cape Coast, so Cape Coast also sent a contingent of soldiers, but the bulk of them were Glover's Constabulary, Glover's Hausa Constabulary. After the 1874 defeat of the Ashantis, that group of freed and escapee slaves became constituted into the Gold Coast Constabulary. So they started off as part of the expeditionary force to invade Ashanti. And then after demobilization, they were constituted into a Gold Coast Hausa. The word Hausa was just to denote that they were the word Hausa is really important because historically it was used to distinguish between the native and the alien. So not the foreigner. The foreigner was, Lebanese was foreigner, British was foreigner. But alien was, black people who were not denizens of Accra or so these were people who came from outside. And then it was constituted after 1874. After demobilization, they were constituted into the Gold Coast Constabulary. So you see, the name moved from Glover's Boys, Glover's Hausa Constabulary, to the Gold Coast Constabulary. And in the 1880s, the constabulary was split into the army and the police. So all derived from the former slaves who had been joined for the expeditionary force. So if you read the history of Ghana Army, they trace it to that. And if you read the history of Ghana Police, they also trace it to the same source.
The first Zongo to be established in Accra is Asha Town and Lane Zongo, and later Sabon Zango and Tudu.
Now, the Gamashi area had always been congested, and many different colonial administrators had sought to decongest the Gamashi area. The way that they attempted to decongest was during disease epidemics. So the bubonic plague, the yellow fever epidemic, and so on and so forth.
Chief Brima, Malam Bako, and Kadiri English were the foremost key figures who led these establishments and expansions. Chief Brima entered the side of the British territory in 1866. Born in Ilorin, the current capital town of the political creation Kwara State in Nigeria, he was of both Yoruba and Fulani parentage. He was a wealthy merchant whose migrations were partly due to conflict, but mostly due to trade.
Chief Brahma was the first head of as the archival documents, as the British put it, the first head of the Mohammedan community. But I would rather refine it to Islamic community. This was a man who migrated in the latter part of the 1800s from Ilorin in Kwara State, today's Kwara State, to finally Accra. He settled in various places by final Accra. There is this legend which has it that he had a dream that he was going to move to a place where either he had a dream or he was told by a cleric that, look, he would one day move to another part of this region where there is a large body of water, which is the Atlantic Ocean. Others to say, well, there was this tribal disputes, over chieftaincy. He came with some wives. When he came and settled eventually, he came by, as fate will have it, by a local woman from the Tabon group. In fact, the local home, the native home, is still there at Inshogono. He himself was a rich man dealing in hula and cattle. In fact, some archival documents refer to him as Brahma Butcher. He caught the eye of the legendary Ghana king, King Takitaria, who picked him as the head of the Mohammedan community. But the coronation wasn't done before God called King Takitaria. He passed on. But then there was an influential personality in the Ghana community, Gamashi community, who remembered the wish of King Takitaria, brought it out, and then a coronation was made. Now, the British felt comfortable dealing with Chief Brahma I. And there were a lot of controversies in those days. There were, ethnocentric disagreements. Some of the local tribes, migrant local tribes, didn't want to accept Chief Brahma I as the head of the Mohammedan community. So there was an instance when the then governor traveled to England. And any time a governor traveled, telecommunications weren't advanced in those days, so sometimes they had to even travel for consultations and so on. So when that governor traveled, it was Governor Herbert Bryant. Some of them were soldiers. He was a Major Herbert Bryant. Because of the raging controversy disputes, he hosted the heads of the various groups at the Christian Bock Castle. And, well, what he did was he only endorsed the appointment of Chief Brahma as the head of the Mohammedan community. Some of them were disappointed. And I wouldn't even be surprised that it was a furtherance of the annoyance which even led to the controversy which culminated in the closure of the Accra main mosque, the first central mosque where we now have traders settle, Rollins Park in Accra. And so Chief Brahma was an important personality in the Islamic community in Accra. He was wealthy. He put up a lot of buildings. The end, one of the portions of the General Post Office today, as we have it, was his palace. And the British later bought that portion and extended the General Post Office. And then his family bought a place at Okanshi, which is now the palace of Chief Brahma. But that is how some people even think they argued that no, he wasn't the first head of the Mohammedan community. But you see, the archival documents make that easy. Chief Brahma the first. Why the first? You have the Brahma family having amongst them Ga-speaking Brahma family members and Yoruba-speaking, Ga-speaking. And in fact, as I speak here, I am part of the Brahma family because my mother is the first born of one of the children of Chief Brahma the first. Although I am a Dagomba, my father is a Dagomba, my mother is Yoruba and Ga Tabon mix up. Cow Lane was where they settled. In fact, the General Post Office is part of Cow Lane. They used to rear animals. Our people love rearing animals. Cow Lane, where he lived, had many animals. People had animals there. So when they were naming the place, it took the name of Cow Lane. In fact, the Yorubas call it Agu Malu. Malu is cow.
Now, Chief Brahma became very important because of his ability to be able to render some kind of service to the migrant community in Accra. More or less, he was regarded as a leader. I will not say a chief at that point, but as a leader who almost all migrants, and here migrants without categorization, they could be Dagomba, they could be Gunja, they could be Hausa, they could be Yoruba, were looking up to. And fortunately for Chief Brahma, he was also so much liked by the Ga, as well as by the British administration. So whenever there was an issue within Accra, Chief Brahma was the one that both the Ga and then the British will call upon in order to be able to help resolve that issue. One other thing that made Chief Brahma very important was the fact that he helped to increase the revenue mobilization during the Gold Coast period, because it was through him that traders in some of these products were taxed. You get it? And so the colonial administration saw him as very important. Regarding the establishment of Tudu and the role of Chief Brahma, what happened was that already there was a plan to segregate Accra into 3 neighborhoods. A place reserved for the indigenous Ga, very close to the sea, and because of the nature of their trade, fishing. Another community that would be made up of entirely migrants, and it's important to know that when we're talking about migrants, it included Syrians, it included Lebanese, it included Indians. All of them were regarded as migrants. Any other person apart from being an European, Arabs, were all classified as migrants. So you can imagine the influence that Chief Brahma had over all these people. So what happened was that there was an attempt to segregate Accra into 3. An entirely separate place for Europeans, separate place for migrants, and then separate place for the indigents, and that is the Ga or the Gadangbe group. But there was some form of difficulty in doing that. How are we going to do this? Fortunately or unfortunately, in 1908, there was the outbreak of what we call the bubonic plague. And that served as a trigger for the colonial administration to be able to divide or segregate Accra into 3. And that is where Tudu comes in.
The British governor invited them, the heads, and told them, look, you are aware that there is a plague in this town now, Accra, and people are dying. So what we intend doing, how many people have died in the Islamic Zongo community? And then they said, no, nobody died. I said, well, this is the action we are taking. We are going to move those who do not have houses which meet a certain standard, because we want to enforce hygiene, without which the bubonic plague will kill a lot of people. So rearing of animals was ordered, stopped at that time. Those who did not have houses which met a certain standard were moved out to what we now have as Tudu. Then Oblogo Road, which is Zango and Tudu and Sabon Zango, as we have them today. So that is Cow Lane. So to date, Chief Brahma's descendants are in Cow Lane. There is a Yoruba mosque there. There are houses belonging to the Brahmas there, and so on and so forth.
So you should bear in mind that at that time, whether we like it or not, there was some kind of internal rivalry also among the migrant groups. This centered on who was more important or who more or less should control affairs. There was a kind of religious aspect to it, especially who should serve as a chief imam at that period. So that also divided the migrant community and by extension, the Zongo community that was then around Cowlin. So when they were given the opportunity to choose between this, the Hausa group chose the Oglogo Road, and then the Yoruba Fulani, Kanure, and other groups chose the Kibi Road, which is Tudu today. You know, so this is and of course, the group that went to Tudu was actually the group that was under Chief Brahma then.
Malam Bako was the son of Malam Nenu, who was part of the earlier clerical migrants said to have migrated in the early 1800s before the others settled. Malam Bako chose to settle on the Oblogo Road in 1908 when the need for expansion came. He was also the 8th chief imam of Accra.
Ni ne jikan Malam Bako. Da Malam Nenu ya zo Ankara tare da mutane kaman uku. Amma mutane ukun ga masu sai da kaya ne. Kaman masu sai da goro suka zo tare da shi. Su sun sai da goro sun koma, amma shi ya saura Ankara wajen Ankarawa. Ya sallama musu sai suka amshe shi. Suka ba shi waje wanda ake kiran wajen yanzu gidan sarka Oxford kenan. A wannan lokacin babu wannan gidan sarka, fili ne. Sitima in ya zo nan ne port. Suka ɗauki Malam Nainu suka ajiye shi. Suka ba shi waje ya zauna yana bautan Allah. She suka kaman mutum ne mai bautan Allah, mai tsoron Allah. Suna tare da Malam Bako. Malam Bako na wajen baƙi na zuwa, mutane na zuwa. Sai wajen na yi mai kankani. Sai mutanen English su Ankarawan da yake tare da su, sai suka ce da su ƙaro da shi gaba su ƙara mai waje. Sai suka kawo shi inda aka ce zangon Malam, yau shi ne ake kira Zongo Lane. Suka kawo shi wajen mutanen English. Yana nan waje mutane na ƙara zuwa. Shi har yanzu kuma sai ce a ba shi wani wuri kuma ya yi wani sabon zango. Sai aka ce ya je ya duba duk inda yake so. Da ya fito cikin gari sai zo inda yau ake cewa railway station, sai zo wajen sai zauna sai ce nan ya yi mai. Sai ya gina ɗaki 6. A wannan lokaci British time ne, gwamnati ina fitowa daga London ina zuwa nan ga cikin Accra, that time shi ke rule. Sai ya zo ya ce wa Malam Bako, wajen ga da kai waje ina son wajen ka bani, zan yi railway station, ka je ka samu waje, ni ma na taimaka maka. Sai Malam Bako ce na baka. Nawa ka bata ka yi aiki? Sai ce jikka 3. sai aka biya shi jukka 3 sai tashi daga nan railway station ina zuwa sai zo fadama nan inda ake fadama da shi da yan uwan shi sai sallah da ya tashi ce nan ga ba bai zama nan ga kowa ya zo ya zauna nan ya tashi ruwa mazaunin ruwa ku gwada mata amin mazaunin ruwa ne nan kowa ya zauna ya tashi sai tashi sai ya wuce sai Monprobi sai zauna ya sallah 2 sai tashi ya wuce sai Chako ya zauna ya sallah raka 2 sai tashi sai ya wuce sai gangaro sai nan zango to sai malam bako sai ya zo sai ya ce nan ne sai aka zauna aka huta sai aka fara noma kaɗan da hakanan aka yi noman zangonga ya zama shine sabon zango Accra. An fito zangon malam an zo sabon zangon malam bako. A lokacin da malam bako zo ya iske wani itace na nan da ya dubi itacen kawai sai ce nan dan gina gidana inda itacen nan yake ya iske itacen wajen ya ce nan dan gina gidana inda itacen nan yake nan malam bako ya gina gidan shi itacen nan yana nan har yanzu malam bako ya iske shi wajen kuma zango yau yana da shekara 112 years zango amma itacen nan yana wajen nan ki ga gidan ko da yake an gina gida amma inda itacen yake yanda yake malam bako ya zo iske shi na nan yanda yake haka nan.
He was said to have requested for visually impaired people to be brought to him from Nigeria to be part of the new community because he believed they help in prayers for her state. They were given a land to settle on and they also have their own chief.
Malam Bako shine wanda ya kafa zango kuma da ya kafa zango kuma shi Malam Bako shi yayi dalilin kawo makafi na shi ya ba makafi wannan wurin har zuwa yanzu insha Allah dan da lokaci makafi can suke zangon kadir daga zangon kadir da Malam Bako ya zo ya ce yana neman addu'a makafi su tanye shi roƙon Allah ya samu ƙasa wadda zai na Hausawa musulmai zai samu mutanen ƙasa su bashi su kuma suka yi addu'a Allah ya karba sun samu ƙasa haka ba Malam Bako shi kuma ya ce to alhamdulillah shi ma zai yi wani abu wanda yake ya kyautata musu shi yasa ya ɗauki wanga unguwa shi da kansa ya zo ya yanka unguwan yabba makafi.
Chief Kadiri English was a wealthy merchant who migrated from Kano, a visionary who made a huge mark in the lives of Hausa migrants.
Kadiri English, my grandfather, became the chief, and then his first son, though he had a lot of children, they were women. But Chief Bawa later on, after his demise in 1933, he was also installed as Turban as the chief of Hausa community to succeed his father. Actually, it never happened. Ours is never like a monarchy. It's the community who would, well, nominate and appoint you to be the leader. So because of the qualities of our grandfather, that he's led the people very well and then he's taking care of his people. So when the chance came, his son, Chief Bawa Kadiri English, was also turbaned, that's 1933, to become the chief of our community. That has been so, and then after Chief Bawa, then his son, Chief Ali, and then after that, then the present chief, Chief Kabir Kadiri English. Yeah. So that has been the case, and then so it looked like now it's become a monarchy because our people believe in us. We've given them good leadership. And so anytime there's the chance, they call upon the house that they should present to them a leader who will lead the Hausa community. Yeah. So it's been so all this while. He was a businessman. He dealt mostly in cola, and then because he became an agent, clearing agent, exporting cola. Yeah, that's how he had a working relationship with the English because of the ports here. But he had a farmland at Zongo and Tudu. That's why he never dealt in cattle directly. Oh, he's from Kano, Gaya. So that became an adopted name for him. So his name is Abdul Kadri Kawata, Kadri English. And then so the Kadri English became a compound name. And then by his great-grandfather's name was Kawata. That's the family name. If you go to Gaya now, as I speak to you, and then you go to the Galadima quarters of Gaya and mention the Kawata families, will be taken to the ancestral home.
Yeah, he was good friends with Marlon Naino from what we have heard. Yes, even though some people argue that Marlon Naino was relatively older, but they were contemporaries and they lived very happily with no incidences recorded whatsoever between them, yes.
Zongos have impacted the country in diverse ways, especially in the formative years of the country, on security, commerce, and introduction of new fashion and new meals into the Ghanaian culinary ecosystem.
There were threats. People were attacking, the traders on the trade routes. Ashantis were giving them problems. So they decided that, look, let's bring some soldiers. They brought West Indians, whose ancestors too were from here anyway, but they were not doing the work well. They were not primed for the assignments they were meant to do. So the British decided that no, they should bring people. After all, Nigeria was their possession. Sierra Leone was their possession. The Gold Coast was their possession. So they brought in soldiers from Nigeria. Now, the soldiers were called Captain Glover's 600 Houses. To date, when you study military history, when you go to the military academy, Ghana, when you go to the police college, and you study military history, you will definitely study Captain Glover's 600 Houses. Now, these 600 houses, although they were called houses, they were not all houses. In fact, they were Yorubas. Some of them were Yorubas, some of them were Bari, that is the Kanuris. When they brought them here, they were fighting the Ashantis for the British. Some of them also saw action. In fact, when they came at first, they were billeted in Elmina. Then later, they deployed them, brought them to the lines to fight. I can mention some names like Native Officer Harizanwa, Native Officer Dambornu, Native Officer Mazawaji. Now, let's go back. Native Officer Dambornu is the grandfather of the National Chief Imam. Harizanwa is a brother to Native Officer Dambornu. They came together as part of the Captain Glover 600 Houses. Once upon a time, a governor was on trek. Once in a while, they go to the hinterland to see the areas. When he went, he saw a tombstone, broken tombstone. He took the trouble to look at it, and then he saw the inscription, Native Officer Dambornu. Now, Dambornu died around there in a town called Sampa. He was buried there, and a tombstone was put there. So they worked on the tombstone, and we got, through oral tradition and records, we heard about it. And in fact, his brother, Harizanwa, I think one of them's sword of honor used to be in possession of the late Farouk Brahma, whose mother's side, it's that family. The Harizanwa family, they have a house at Adabraka, Gidan Zanwa. But when you go to Nigeria, Borno State today, you will hear the word Zanwa. It is a Bari or Kanuri word. So the Captain Global 600 houses have had people like that. We also had a Yoruba man called Akerele. Now, Akerele's name was part of a cenotaph at Watto Club. When you go in front, around Watto Club, there is a cenotaph. A cenotaph is an object on which names of distinguished soldiers or policemen are inscribed as a mark of honor. So that is basically the story of the Captain Global 600 houses. We can go on and on them. In fact, when you go to the Kumasi Fort, it's a museum now, military museum. You have inscriptions of them, and some of them there, yeah.
Well, now there are different kinds of markets in Accra. They've always had a contribution to some of the more well-known markets. Let's take Makola. Makola is a good example. The area that we know as Makola was originally on the outskirts of Gamashi. So Gamashi was considered around the Jamestown Harbor, and Jamestown Harbor, because it serviced the harbor, it was full of what might be described as warehouses. Now, if you go, down from Jamestown Harbor, we're looking at maybe 2 miles in, you get to the area that is now Makola. That area used to be an area for cattle, for herding cattle, where cattle used to graze. And it was dominated by northern merchants. So mainly Muslim merchants. When the colonial government decided, so let me backtrack a little bit, that area was peripheral to Gamashi. So we are looking at the outskirts of Gamashi was today's Makola. In the 1820s, specifically 1824, the government decided to build a market in that area where originally the cows and the people were herding, the northern merchants and their satellites were herding their cows. And that place became Makola. Now, their contribution to Makola as we know it today, most people do not know that I believe in 1996, when Makola was burnt down, there was a completely razed to the ground. The then mayor of Accra was Mr. Nat Amatefu. Now, Amatefu told me in personal conversation, private conversation, that as mayor, he was tasked with finding the stall owners for compensation and also to help them rebuild, because they wanted to rebuild the market. And he was shocked to find that most of the stalls, when they produced the papers, were owned by Yoruba traders. This tells us another thing, and which is that the area around Makola before it became Makola, I already mentioned it was dominated by cow herders. Some of these cow herders were Yoruba Muslim merchants. So the area was a confluence of Yoruba Muslim merchants and traders from the northern territories. And that is their contribution to this very well-known Makola market. We also have Salaga Market. This is in the heart of Gamashi. Salaga Market was specifically started by the Brits in 1874. The Brits set up Salaga Market in the heart of Gamashi, specifically to break the back of Ashanti control of the cola trade. So Salaga was an enclave among the Gan. So Salaga is distinctive from the other Zongos because it was not on the outskirts of the town. It's the only one that was not on the outskirts. It was incorporated because it was created by the British. All the other Zongos that we know were established on the outskirts of the then township.
as we have indicated, Lane was one of them. Tudu is another. Adabraka is another place. Mamobi is another place, you know. So these are some of the important trading points. But there's a place that we have forgotten, Achimota. You should know that Achimota is technically a Zongo because Achimota was founded by Grushis to cultivate tomatoes. So if you go into the historical records, into the archives, Achimota was a very important place for the production of vegetables by the Grushi. In those days, if you needed vegetables, actually Ebri Gardens, that has come a place for its aesthetics, was actually the conceptualization was for Ebri Gardens to produce vegetables to feed Accra. So Ebri, Achimota, and Nsawam, these were places that were supposed to feed the urban space as far as vegetables, especially tomatoes, was concerned.
They are a people who have thrived against all odds. However, one may ask, how is it that a people who have blazed the trail in trading in Africa and opened up otherwise uninhabitable lands believing so simply till date?
Because the architecture is very different. You know, the very narrow parts, you get it. And many people don't understand the philosophy of it. It is just the need to get closer. And the getting closer has two important things. You see, you are few in a community. You wouldn't like to spread about. If there's danger, how do you deal with it? So if you see how cramped Zongos are, it's actually a kind of social and military mechanism. Military mechanism to rise up and protect each other. A social mechanism for you to be able to touch each other on a daily basis. You get the point. So it is not so much that they lack space. You get it? Because they always go to the frontier. And at the frontier, there's open space for them. Why wouldn't they just build big houses? No, that's not the intention. For them, small space so that we stay together. You know, so for them, you can look at the Zongo buildings as forms of building strategic identities. So they are trying to build a kind of strategic identity that makes them unique. You get it? Otherwise you say, oh, but why wouldn't you go and build? No. It's a way to be able to offer support to each other and also to be able to defend each other at all times. You get the point. And also the fact that families are so close that they wouldn't like to get separated. You get it. You would definitely like to be together. And also that kind of simplicity of life. Why do we have to grab land? You know, why do we have to? For what? You get it. But nonetheless, the question you will ask yourself too is that why is it that the migrants are also interested in settling at the outskirts? There's a fundamental reason for this. We should bear in mind that most of the Zongos are founded by Muslims. And for the sake of their own religion, they will also like to stay a little bit away in order to be able to have the peace of mind in order to practice their religion. And so I think that in trying to understand the relationship, I see it as a win-win relationship where there's no kind of rivalry that will emerge between the migrants and then the indigenous community. You are migrants, you are staying there and doing whatever you have to do. We are also in our indigenous community and doing what we have to do. So I think that this is a philosophy that has really helped in maintaining some kind of peace between the indigenous community, such as the Ga, and then the migrant Zongo communities in Accra. Once the Zongo is founded, then the town will grow and meet it, then another Zongo will be founded. So if you look at it, from Gamashi proper, then we have Lane, which was a migrant community. It grew and met it. Then to Tudu. Then it grew and met it. Then Adabraka, it grew and met it. Then Newtown, Nima, it grew and met it. Now Medina. Now we've moved to, in fact, there's Fulani after Adenta there. And then there was, you see, so you can look at Zongos as markers of Accra's development.